I have a story to share with you, one that still gives me goosebumps whenever I think about it. It happened a few years ago when I was still in college and living in a small apartment by myself. One night, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard a strange noise coming from my living room. It sounded like something was shuffling around out there, and I immediately sat up in my bed, heart racing. I tried to tell myself that it was probably just my imagination, or maybe a neighbor making noise in the hallway. But then I heard it again, louder this time, and I knew that someone was definitely in my apartment. I slowly got out of bed and tiptoed to my bedroom door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I didn't want whoever was out there to know that I was awake and aware of their presence. As I peeked out into the living room, my heart sank. There was a man there, looking through my belongings as if he was searching for something. He was tall and lanky with messy hair and dark clothes that blended into the shadows. I froze, unsure of what to do next. Should I call out for help, try to get out of the apartment, or try to confront him myself? Before I could make a decision, the man turned around and saw me standing there. His eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. And then he spoke, his voice low and menacing. "Don't you move," he said, "or I'll hurt you." I was paralyzed with fear, unable to even scream. I don't know what he wanted or why he was in my apartment, but I knew that I had to do something before it was too late. I took a deep breath and lunged forward, hoping to catch him off guard, but he was quicker than I had expected, and he grabbed me by my shoulders, pushing me back against the wall. For a few moments, we struggled together, him trying to overpower me and me fighting back with all my strength. But eventually, he was able to subdue me, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital with a bandage around my stomach. Turns out that the man had stabbed me during our struggle. I never found out who he was or why he had targeted me, probably just a common robbery that went bad. But the experience left me shaken and traumatized, and to this day I still have nightmares about that terrifying night in my small apartment. After the attack, I became very anxious and paranoid. I had trouble sleeping, and every little noise and creak in the apartment would send me into a panic. I ended up moving out of that apartment and into a more secure building, but I still struggled with fear and anxiety for months after that. It took a lot of therapy and support from friends and family to help me overcome the trauma of that night. But eventually, I was able to move on and start living my life again. Looking back on the experience, I realize how lucky I am to still be alive. The man who attacked me could have easily done much worse, and I will never forget how close I came to losing my life that night. Now I always make sure to take extra precautions to keep myself safe. I always lock my doors and windows, and I never let strangers into my home. And while I can never fully shake the fear that still lingers from that night, I am grateful for the strength and resilience that I have gained as a result of surviving such a scary experience. I remember the night that changed my life. It was a stormy, dark evening in late October, and I was walking home from my late shift at the local grocery store. The wind was howling and the rain was pouring down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see where I was going. I had my hood up, but it did little to shield me from the weather. My only solace was the knowledge that I was nearly home. As I approached the small, rundown house that I had rented, I noticed that there was a light on in the living room. That was odd, as I always had turned off all the lights when I left. I tried to shake off my unease and I went inside, calling out to see if anyone was home. There was no answer. The living room was empty, but the light was on, casting an eerie glow over the room. I started to feel uneasy, and my heart started pounding in my chest. Suddenly, I heard a noise from upstairs, like footsteps on a creaky floorboard. I froze, unsure of what to do. I called out again, but there was no answer. I slowly made my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top, I saw that the door to my bedroom was open, and that the light was on inside. My heart racing, I slowly pushed the door open. Inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the corner of the room, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't see any features, just a vague outline of a human form. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't let me. The figure started to move towards me, and I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure was almost upon me, and I could feel its cold breath on my face. Suddenly it lunged at me, and I fell backwards, hitting my head on the floor. When I woke up, I was lying there, my head pounding. The room was empty, and there was no sign of the intruder. I stumbled to my feet, trying to remember what had happened. Had it all been a dream? But then I saw something that sent a chill up my spine. There was a message scrawled on the wall, written in what looked like blood. It read, "Leave now before it's too late." I knew then that I had to get out of that house, and I packed a bag and left that same night. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that something's following me or I'm being watched. That thing or whatever it is still out there waiting for me. I'm sure that it's just paranoia, but I'm still scared to death of that thing. I've tried to forget about that night, but it haunts me still. Sometimes in my darkest moments, I wonder if I made it out alive at all. Maybe I'm still trapped in that house and the figure is still lurking over me. I know it sounds crazy, but I still feel like it's following me. I'll be walking down the street and catch a glimpse of something in the shadows, and I'll know that it's there, watching me. I've tried to tell people about what happened, but nobody really believes me. They think that it might have just been an intruder trying to rob me, nothing more than that. They honestly think I'm crazy, and I'm starting to wonder if they're right. Maybe I'm really just imagining it all, and there really is nothing to be afraid of. But still, when I start to doubt myself, something will happen that will remind me of that night. A simple gust of wind, a flickering light, a creaking floorboard, and I'll be transported back to it. Memorial Day 2015. My boyfriend at the time and I got an invitation to meet up with some friends who were hanging out at a marina just outside of the city that we lived in. The marina wasn't in the best neighborhood, but the friends that we were meeting and hung out at this spot on the banks of the river a few times before to go camping and canoeing. I had heard from my friends about how the last time they partied here, a guy who had just gotten out of prison ended up joining their campfire, and how it had made for a great story. They had all laughed about it, and it became something of a group inside joke. And Tyrone asking them to play Wonderwall on the guitar all night. At every party that I would hear about it, "Hey, remember that time at the marina, Tyrone? Blah blah blah." Everybody would reminisce and cut up about how hilarious the night was. It became somewhat of a tradition for them to go to this place on summer holidays, to enjoy the water and the surrounding nature. Feeling invincible and that nothing bad would happen to us, we decided to join up with our 3 friends for the night. That was sure to be a good story for future parties. And we did get a story to tell, but it wasn't lighthearted like singing campfire songs with a convict. It was something darker, something that we would only talk about in hushed voices at parties after we had had a few, and could brave bringing the memory back to light. It was already dark by the time that we drove the 20 minutes out of the city to meet up with them. Honestly, I was in a sour mood because I had to work early the next morning and I didn't want to be out late. Why we hadn't left hours previously to meet them is beyond me. Knowing that my boyfriend, myself, and our crew of friends, we'd end up drinking on the riverbank until we were too drunk to drive home, fall asleep outside and my phone would die. My alarm wouldn't go off and I'd miss work and get in big trouble. I remember standing in the parking lot once we had arrived and feeling extremely unsettled. I was pouting against the truck of my boyfriend's car and giving him a stern talk, saying, "We can't be out here too late. I have to work tomorrow. If we end up camping here tonight, I'm going to be pissed. I don't even want to be here right now." But since he was the one who had driven us out there and was looking forward to hanging out with friends, I didn't push it. He promised that we wouldn't be out late and that he wouldn't get drunk. I almost demanded that he take me home right then because I felt so uncomfortable being there. But I didn't want to ruin our entire night. At the time, I chalked it up to being in a bad mood and acting like a Debbie Downer. But what ended up happening later told me that I should have listened to my instincts and gotten the heck out of there ASAP. The marina is essentially just a big parking lot with a couple boat launches and a pathway that went into the surrounding woods around the river. It was isolated, poorly lit, and since it was a long holiday weekend, all types of people were out partying in the woods. There were at least 4 other cars in the lot, one of which was our friend's car. We unpacked the car and started walking through the woods on a narrow path with a 6-pack of beer and our phone flashlights to see in the darkness. Our friends were already out on the riverbank with their canoe and they had texted us their location. My boyfriend had also been there before, so I followed his lead. After a few minutes of walking into the woods, we heard 2 guys behind us talking in a slurred speech to each other, saying something to us like, "You guys having a good night?" We assumed that they were just wasted and laughed, responding, "Oh yeah, we're just getting started." They mumbled more to each other incoherently and went off on a different path into the woods with their flashlight. We didn't get a good look at them, but I remember they were wearing gym shorts and cut-off muscle shirts. It had startled me a bit because they seemed to have come out of nowhere, but they didn't seem threatening. We brushed it off and weren't concerned that we had run into other people since we knew we weren't the only ones on the marina. Now it seems that they could have been stalking our movements over the course of the evening because of what was to follow. I'll try to explain the landscape a little more for details that'll be relevant later on. We were directly on a rocky riverbank, so to our one side was water and to our backs was the woods. We had entered the woods from the left end of the parking lot, if you were facing the river, and took a path that eventually forked in the middle. Once you reached the fork, by going down the right path about 50 feet or so, you wound up at our campsite and the riverbank. If you stayed straight on the path, you went deeper into the woods until the path met some fallen trees, really overgrown brush, and it ended. The spot that we had picked had a large, flat, open embankment, but further up, the path pretty much just dropped off into the water, as it was on a steeper part of the hillside. It seemed to us at the time that there was one way in and one way out of the area, and that anyone who went up the path essentially had to walk past where we were all sitting. I'm sure there were other small paths around since the woods weren't super thick, but the one that we took to the water was clearly walked on frequently and often. Finally, we had reached our friends who had laid out a blanket and had already cracked open some beers. We had all intended to row out to a nearby island with the canoe, but we had noticed that some people already had set up camp at that spot and could see their campfire from the shore. Oh well, we figured this was just as good a spot as any to enjoy our evening, and we weren't miffed about the change of plans. We started to relax, had a drink ourselves and smoked some cigarettes, and then talked about starting a fire to keep warm in the cool evening. We gathered some firewood from nearby and explored the path a bit more, not running into any more people for the time being. After we had started a fire and settled in for the night, I tried to cheer up and get out of my crappy mood and enjoy the company of my friends. It was difficult though. I found myself staring down the path and jumping at every little sound or twig cracking in the distance. The guys weren't paying much attention to the surroundings and were talking loudly. They were in their own world. At one point, I distinctly remember my friend's girlfriend leaning over me and saying, "Do you have a weird feeling about tonight?" I just feel like something bad is going to happen. It freaked me out because I knew exactly what she was talking about. No matter how many beers I had or how much I tried to distract myself with light conversation, something about the night just felt off. It's like the air was full of electricity and danger. A few minutes later, a group of about 5 men aged 20 to 25 appeared out of the tall weeds and started towards our fire. I could see them squinting in our direction when one of them said, "Is this Joe's party?" I made out some silhouettes of the figures in gym shorts, but I couldn't discern any physical features because of the way the campfire was casting shadows around the trees. They had plastic bags in their hands, which I assumed were full of towels or after-swimming clothes. We all said, No, you got the wrong group." They apologized for bothering us, wished us a good evening, and started back the way that they came. It seemed then that their group split off into 2 different parties though, because after the interaction, 3 of the guys stayed close by the tree line, trying to kick over a stump in the ground, making a ruckus, and 2 more had gone up further up the riverbank with their flashlights. I could see the light dancing off the tree branches in the water, but having walked farther up the path earlier with my boyfriend for firewood, I remembered that the path had turned into a dead end. I waited for the light to start coming back toward our campsite, or the group to walk back to us, heading back toward the parking lot, but they never passed by us again. The 3 guys messing with the stump left after a while, and I figured they went to go find Joe. The flashlight beam disappeared from view, and I stopped thinking about it, turning my attention back to my friends. About 20 minutes passed when our conversation was broken by something that made us all go dead silent. Suddenly, we hear a man about 75 feet away yell loudly, "Hey, what are you doing, man?" And then a sort of shuffle of feet and movement. "Hey, get away from me," he yelled. "What do you think you're doing?" And the sound of something making contact with skin. "No, stop." I could hear a struggle taking place. "Help, somebody help me," followed over and over and over. It then dissolved into what sounded like somebody being attacked. We heard something hitting something. Maybe a fist in the man's body and maybe a blunt weapon or a knife, as he screamed for help. We only heard his voice as the assailant seemed to have surprised the guy and began attacking him without saying anything. He yelled in agony for what seemed like forever until he finally went silent. You could hear his voice weakening. His groaning faded as it seemed he went unconscious or worse. I can never unhear the sound of it to this day. My friend yelled into the distance, "Yo, what the heck?" And it brought us all back to reality. Whatever had just happened had happened just beyond where we were sitting. We had a small fire burning, and we were very clearly visible from the tree line, and 5 of us had just witnessed somebody being brutally attacked. The rushes and weeds near us started rustling, as all chaos broke out on our campsite. We had to leave the area and fast, but we were cornered. We stood up, grabbing bags, shoes, only what was necessary and within reach, and we got ready to run. Someone doused the fire. We couldn't take the pass since that was likely where the attack had just taken place, and somebody was probably about to burst into our campsite and ambush us. I didn't dare look behind me. The canoe, it was the only way out. We started pushing it out into the water in a panic. I got in first, uncontrollably shaking and sobbing. My boyfriend had sense enough to grab my purse and handed it to me, as he helped my hand get the canoe far enough away from the shore so we could push off. My friend's girlfriend was holding me, trying to calm me down, but I was too afraid to move or speak. Everybody else was silent with a straight fear written all over their faces. With 5 grown adults in a small canoe, all I could picture was the boat capsizing, or somebody picking us off from shore with a gun. We paddled out into the middle of the river and watched our campsite disappear around the bend. Once we felt out of threat of immediate danger, I called 911 from the boat and shakily told the police what we think had just happened. The cop on the line was impatient and tense, only saying that they had already gotten a call about the situation, and he had hung up on me. As we floated down the river, the boat launch in the marina came into view. We could see from the water that the parking lot was alive with ambulances and police cars. We hurriedly had docked the boat and climbed out, carrying the canoe up the ramp. No one stopped us to ask any questions or even noticed us, a frightened group of hippies conspicuously dragging a canoe behind them. I saw some cops walking down the pathway that led to the river with flashlights, but they weren't moving with any sense of urgency. A couple guys were talking with officers at the ambulance with their shirts off, wearing gym shorts or swim trunks, but we couldn't tell if it was members of the group that had walked by our campsite, claiming to be looking for Joe. But I assumed they had to have been since the incident happened shortly after we had all crossed paths. Strangely, no one appeared to be injured. The ambulance cab was empty. No one was in handcuffs and everybody just seemed to be talking calmly. Something was off, but we didn't stick around to find out if they had found anything in the woods. We looked for news stories for weeks after the fact and found nothing about the incident. No victim, no attacker, nothing. Were we in the wrong place at the wrong time? What happened to the guy who was attacked, or was he faking it all just to mess with us? We were almost victimized by a group of dangerous youth that had scoped us out, seeing us as an easy target. We speculated that this could have been an attempt to lure us into the woods, to jump us, among many other possibilities. But we never had any answers about what had happened in the woods that night. The next day, some of the group went back to gather up supplies that we had left behind in our panic. They didn't find anything stolen or strange in the path near where this had happened. I have never been back to the marina, and that group of friends has since dissolved and moved off to different parts of the world. We had went out looking for an evening of fun and got more than we had bargained for. I was personally traumatized for weeks. Any sudden noises or surprises sent me into a fit of panic, sobs and shaking. Eventually, I was able to stop hearing a man scream for his life every time that I closed my eyes.